Welcome to True Emotional Whisper. Tonight's tale takes you on a journey of courage and kindness. The girl who shared her lunch with a stranger. Later, a luxury car stopped to thank her. Where are you from? Share with us in the comments, and remember to like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting stories. It was a chilly November afternoon in 1998, and Madison Turner, a 24-year-old waitress at a small diner in Detroit, had just stepped out for her lunch break. She didn't notice the man sitting by the alley until he mumbled, "Help me, please." She hesitated. He was disheveled, his hands trembling, and his sunken eyes were haunting. Something about him seemed off. Madison decided to share half of her turkey sandwich with him, more out of pity than generosity. But as she handed it to him, he whispered a chilling phrase, "They'll know you helped me. Be careful." The day had started like any other. Madison was running late for her morning shift, her best friend Laura teasing her over coffee about her hopeless crush on a local cop named Ryan. "Maybe you should commit a crime just to get his attention," Laura had joked. But nothing could have prepared her for how tangled her life was about to become. As she handed the stranger her lunch, he ate in silence, though his eyes darted nervously to the street. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. After a few minutes, he spoke again, this time barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what you've just done for me." Before Madison could respond, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up across the street. Its tinted windows reflected the overcast sky, making it impossible to see who was inside. The man froze. "They found me," he muttered, dropping the sandwich and bolting down the alley. Madison stood there, stunned. The car's window rolled down slightly, and a voice, smooth but icy, called out, "Miss Turner?" She hadn't given the man her name. From that moment, Madison's life spiraled into chaos. When she returned to the diner, there was a note slipped under the door with a single sentence. "You shouldn't have helped him." Who was the man she'd fed? And why did the people in the car know her name? As days passed, strange things began happening. Her apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken. At work, a man in a dark coat sat at the counter for hours without ordering anything, just watching her. And then there were the phone calls. Long silences on the other end of the line, followed by a faint sound that resembled heavy breathing. Ryan, the cop, started noticing her unease. "Maddie, are you okay? You've been jumpy lately," he asked one night while picking up coffee at the diner. She wanted to tell him everything but hesitated. What if she dragged him into whatever mess this was? One late evening, as she was leaving her shift, the black Mercedes appeared again, idling at the curb. A man in a tailored suit stepped out this time. He looked out of place, impeccably dressed, clean-shaven, and oozing authority. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm here to thank you on behalf of Mr. Rains. You may not realize it, but your kindness has saved a life." Before Madison could respond, the man handed her a small envelope. Inside was a note. "The next time they ask for me, tell them you don't know. You'll be safer that way." Alongside the note was a bundle of cash. But Madison wasn't the type to leave questions unanswered. Who was Mr. Rains? And what danger had she unknowingly invited into her life? The more she searched for answers, the darker the shadows around her grew. Soon, she'd find herself entangled in a web of organized crime, secrets, and betrayals, each revelation more terrifying than the last. Madison's life unraveled quickly after the encounter. The black Mercedes kept appearing, always at a distance, always watching. She began to feel like a ghost in her own life, avoiding shadows, double-checking locks, and even skipping work. Ryan, ever the concerned friend, finally cornered her one evening as she sat alone in her apartment, lights off, trembling over a cup of cold tea. "You're scaring me, Maddie," he said, kneeling before her. His green eyes searched hers for answers. "Whatever this is, you don't have to go through it alone." She wanted to tell him everything, the stranger, the note, the Mercedes. But every time she opened her mouth, the memory of that man's trembling voice stopped her. "You'll be safer that way." A week later, she woke to a knock on her door. It was 6 a.m., too early for visitors. Peering through the peephole, she froze. It was the man she had given her lunch to, the one who had disappeared down the alley. But he looked worse now. His face gaunt, clothes torn, and blood staining the collar of his shirt. "Please," he rasped. "They're going to kill me." Madison hesitated for only a moment before pulling him inside. "Who's after you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "People who don't forgive." He coughed, spitting blood onto her floor. "I thought I could run, but there's no escaping them." As he collapsed onto her couch, she grabbed her phone, dialing Ryan. But before she could hit call, the man grabbed her wrist. "No police," he pleaded. "If they find out I'm here, they'll hurt you too." That evening, Madison sat by the man's side as he slept fitfully. He mumbled names in his feverish state. Maria, Jamie, Rains. She pieced together fragments of his story. He had been a driver for a powerful crime family but had betrayed them, trying to escape with his wife and young daughter. "They killed them," he whispered, tears streaking his dirty face. "I thought I could keep them safe. I was wrong." Madison's heart broke. She had lost her parents at a young age, and the pain of that wound still lingered. Now, this stranger, this man who had once seemed so terrifying, was just another soul destroyed by grief and regret. But things only got worse. The next day, Ryan showed up unannounced. He'd heard about the break-in at her apartment and insisted on checking the place. "You don't have to be so strong all the time," he told her gently. Madison wanted to tell him everything, but the man in her living room was listening. She couldn't betray his trust, not after everything he'd lost. Still, Ryan lingered, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the bloodstain on her couch. "Maddie, is someone staying with you?" Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. 3 hard, deliberate knocks. Her blood turned to ice. When she opened the door, a deliveryman stood there with a package. It was addressed to her, but had no return address. Inside, she found a photograph of her and Ryan, taken just 2 days earlier as they laughed over coffee at the diner. The note beneath it read, "Stay out of this, or he's next." That night, Madison made the hardest decision of her life. She helped the man pack his few belongings and gave him directions to an old cabin her father had once owned deep in the woods. "Go there," she said, her voice breaking. "Stay hidden. I'll figure out a way to help you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and guilt. "You don't owe me this." "Yes, I do," she replied, "because no one deserves to lose everything." As he disappeared into the night, Madison turned back to her apartment, determined to confront whoever was behind the threats. She was terrified, but a fire burned in her heart now, one born of compassion and anger. But as she stepped inside, her phone buzzed with a message. "You should have let him die. Now, it's your turn to lose." Madison stared at the message on her phone, her hands trembling. Her mind screamed at her to run, to call Ryan, to disappear. But something deeper inside her knew that running wouldn't save her. Whatever game she'd stumbled into, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The following morning, she drove to the cabin where the man, who had finally shared his name, Elliot, was hiding. Snow had started to fall, and the woods felt eerily quiet, like they were holding their breath. She brought him supplies, but Elliot looked worse than ever. "They'll find me," he whispered. "They always do." Madison placed a hand on his arm. "Not this time," she said, trying to sound confident. But her voice cracked. Elliot's story continued to unfold like a tragedy written in blood. He had worked for the Rains family, a name whispered in fear across Detroit. He was a driver, but one night he overheard plans to eliminate a rival that included innocent children. He tried to warn the targets, only for his betrayal to cost his wife and daughter their lives. "You can't undo what they've done," Elliot said, his voice hollow. "You'll only end up like me, running, always looking over your shoulder." Madison didn't know what kept her going. Perhaps it was her own scars. After losing her parents in a car crash when she was 10, she had spent her life searching for meaning in other people's stories. This time, it wasn't just a story. It was real. That night, as Madison sat in her apartment, She found herself dialing Ryan's number. She couldn't hide anymore. If anyone could protect her, it was him. "Ryan, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm in trouble." Ryan came over immediately, his face a mixture of concern and quiet anger. She told him everything. The lunch she shared with Elliot, the Mercedes, the threats. She even showed him the photograph and the note. "This isn't just trouble, Maddie," Ryan said after a long silence. "This is life or death. You should have come to me sooner." "I couldn't," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want you to get hurt." Ryan reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You think I wouldn't walk through fire for you? Maddie, you're my—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "You mean too much to me." For the first time, Madison felt the weight of his words, the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. It wasn't just friendship. It never had been. But their moment was shattered by the sound of glass breaking in the kitchen. "Get down," Ryan shouted, pulling her behind the couch. Footsteps echoed through the apartment as Madison's heart pounded in her chest. She clutched Ryan's arm, her mind racing. "It's them," she whispered. Ryan nodded, drawing his gun. "Stay here." "No," she said, grabbing his hand. "Don't leave me." Ryan gave her a look, part frustration, part desperation. "I'll protect you, Maddie. Always." The next few minutes felt like hours. Madison heard muffled voices, then a scuffle. When the silence came, it was deafening. She peeked around the couch, her heart stopping when she saw Ryan standing over an unconscious man in black. His hands were shaking as he turned to her. "They know where you live. You can't stay here anymore." The pair spent the night at a motel, but neither of them slept. Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, his gun resting on the nightstand. Madison curled up in a chair, clutching the note that had been left for her. "They'll come for him, won't they?" she asked quietly. Ryan nodded. "And if they think you know where he is, they'll come for you too." Madison's voice broke. "Ryan, what do I do? I can't just abandon him." "You're not alone in this," Ryan said, his voice firm. "We'll figure it out. Together." But the next morning, everything took a devastating turn. When Madison drove back to the cabin to check on Elliot, she found the door ajar. Inside, the small room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, blood smeared on the floor. Elliot was gone. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the floor, sobbing. Ryan arrived minutes later, his face pale when he saw the scene. "He didn't just leave," he said grimly. "They got to him." Madison clutched his arm, tears streaming down her face. "They'll kill him, Ryan, and it'll be my fault." As Ryan led her back to his car, Madison noticed a small piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "Stop looking for him. The next one will be someone you love." She stared at Ryan, her face crumpling in despair. "I can't let them hurt you," she whispered. "And I'm not letting them hurt you," he said, pulling her into his arms. But deep down, Madison knew there were no guarantees. The people she was up against didn't just threaten, they followed through. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. Madison had to make a choice: protect herself and Ryan or risk everything to save a man who had already lost everything. The sun was rising over Detroit as Madison sat on the curb outside the warehouse. The chaos had settled. Raines was in custody, and his empire was crumbling. But Madison couldn't feel the triumph. She clutched Ryan's photograph, staring at the cracks in the pavement. Her body was numb, her heart hollow. Every breath was a struggle as the weight of what she'd lost crushed her. "You did it," Elliot said softly, sitting beside her. His voice carried both awe and sadness. "No," Madison whispered. "I lost everything." Elliot looked away, guilt etched into his features. "Ryan died because of me. If I hadn't—" Madison turned to him, her eyes filled with a fierce, desperate light. "Stop. Ryan died protecting what he believed in. He died because he loved me. And I—" her voice cracked, and she pressed the photo to her chest. "I loved him too." For weeks after that night, Madison drifted through life like a ghost. The media hailed her and Elliot as heroes. Their story splashed across headlines. The woman who took down Detroit's crime family. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her. But none of it mattered. She spent her days at Ryan's grave, the cold wind biting at her skin as she sat in silence. She brought flowers every week, always the same ones. White lilies, his favorite. "I should have told you," she whispered one afternoon, her voice breaking. "I should have told you how much you meant to me, how I couldn't imagine a world without you." Tears streamed down her face. "I was so scared of losing you, and now you're gone." One night, as Madison lay in bed clutching Ryan's photograph, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Come to the diner. Midnight. Trust me." Her heart raced. It couldn't be, could it? She knew she shouldn't go, but something deep inside her, hope, desperation, love, pushed her out the door. The diner was eerily quiet when she arrived. The fluorescent lights flickered, and the familiar smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door. Sitting in their usual booth was a man. His back was to her, but something about the way he held himself, the tilt of his head, the broad shoulders, made her heart skip. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice shaking. The man turned, and Madison's knees nearly buckled. It was him. His face was pale, thinner, and there was a scar along his jaw, but it was him. "Hey, Maddie," he said, his voice soft, his green eyes filling with tears. She ran to him, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. How is this possible? "I saw you. They told you I was dead," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I thought I was, but someone pulled me out before I bled out. It was one of Raines's men, someone who didn't agree with what they were doing. He saved me, got me to a hospital." Madison couldn't stop the tears. "You didn't call me. You let me think you were gone." Ryan looked down, guilt shadowing his face. "I didn't want to put you in danger. If Raines had found out I was alive—" "I don't care," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't care about the danger. I care about you." Ryan reached for her hand, his touch warm and familiar. "I'm here now, Maddie, and I'm not going anywhere." But as they sat there, holding each other in the dim light of the diner, a shadow fell across the window. Madison's breath hitched. She turned, her blood running cold as she saw a figure watching them from outside. A face she recognized. It was Raines's son. Ryan followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "We're not safe," he said, pulling her close. "They're not done with us." Madison's heart pounded. She had fought so hard, lost so much, and now it felt like they were right back where they started. "Then we fight," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Together this time." Ryan nodded, his hand tightening around hers. Together. As they left the diner, hand in hand, Madison felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She didn't know what the future held or how they would survive the storm that was coming. But for the first time, she wasn't alone. Ryan and Madison drove in silence, the hum of the engine their only comfort as the Detroit skyline faded into the distance. Madison couldn't tear her eyes away from him, terrified that if she blinked, he'd disappear again. "How did you find me?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Ryan gripped the wheel tighter. "I never stopped watching, Maddie. Even when I couldn't come to you, I made sure you were okay. Elliot. He helped me when he could." "Elliot knew?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. Ryan glanced at her, guilt shadowing his eyes. "He didn't want to, but I made him promise. I needed to know you were safe." Madison looked away, her heart aching. She wanted to scream, to be angry at him for staying hidden, but all she felt was relief that he was here now. They pulled into a secluded cabin deep in the woods, its faded wood siding barely visible under the moonlight. "This is where I've been staying," Ryan said as they stepped out of the car. Madison took in the sight, simple, quiet, but safe. She followed him inside, where a small fireplace crackled, casting warm shadows on the walls. "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why come back now?" Ryan turned to her, his green eyes brimming with emotion. Because I couldn't stay away anymore. When I saw you on the news, when I heard what you did to bring Rains down, I knew I couldn't let you face this alone. Madison stepped closer, her voice breaking. I thought I lost you, Ryan. I've been living with that pain every single day. And now you're here, and I don't know whether to hug you or hit you. He reached for her, his touch gentle as he cupped her face. I'm sorry, Maddie, for all of it, for letting you think I was gone, for not coming back sooner. But I'm here now. I'm not leaving again. She broke then, collapsing into his arms as sobs racked her body. He held her tightly, his own tears soaking into her hair. I missed you, she whispered. So much. I missed you too, he replied, his voice hoarse. Every second. But their fragile moment of peace was short-lived. The next morning, as Madison sipped coffee by the window, a shadow moved in the woods. Her breath hitched, and she set the mug down carefully. Ryan, she called softly. He appeared instantly, his body tense as he followed her gaze. The figure stepped closer, and Madison's blood ran cold. It was Rains's son, but he wasn't alone. Two other men flanked him, their hands resting on holstered guns. They found us, Ryan muttered, grabbing Madison's hand. What do we do? She asked, her voice shaking. Ryan's jaw tightened. We don't run. Not this time. The men didn't wait long to make their move. The first bullet shattered the window, sending shards of glass flying. Madison ducked as Ryan grabbed a rifle hidden under the couch. Get down, he shouted, firing back. Madison's heart pounded as chaos erupted around her. She crawled toward the back door, her mind racing. She had fought so hard to find Ryan, and now she was about to lose him again. Ryan, she screamed, her voice raw. He turned just in time to see one of the men burst through the door. Before Madison could react, Ryan tackled the man, wrestling the gun from his hands. Go, Maddie, he shouted. I'm not leaving you, she cried, her voice filled with desperation. Another gunshot rang out, and Ryan staggered, clutching his side. Madison screamed, running to him as the assailant fled. You're okay, she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands to the wound. You're okay, Ryan. He gave her a weak smile, his hand brushing her cheek. You've always been the strong one, Maddie. Promise me you'll keep fighting. No, she sobbed, shaking her head. You're not leaving me. Not again. His hand fell away, and Madison's world shattered. Hours later, as the sun set, Madison sat on the porch of the cabin, her hands stained with Ryan's blood. The woods were silent now, the attackers gone. She held his photograph tightly, her tears falling onto the worn paper. You said you wouldn't leave me, she whispered, her voice breaking. You promised. The ache in her chest was unbearable, a hollow void that threatened to consume her. But as the first stars appeared in the night sky, a new resolve settled over her. They had taken Ryan from her, again, and this time, she wouldn't stop until every single person responsible paid the price. Years later, as Sarah and Ethan were enjoying their golden years, a mysterious letter arrived. It was addressed to Sarah, postmarked from a distant city. Intrigued, she opened it. Inside, a faded photograph caught her eye. It was a picture of a young boy, his face blurred, but his eyes held a familiar sadness. A chill ran down her spine. The boy in the photo bore a striking resemblance to the young boy she had shared her lunch with all those years ago. As she delved deeper into the letter, she discovered a shocking truth. The boy in the photo was Ethan, but not the Ethan she knew. The letter revealed a complex web of secrets and lies. The Ethan she had married was an imposter, a man who had stolen the identity of the real Ethan to escape a troubled past. The real Ethan had been living a life of hardship, unaware of the life he could have had. The revelation shattered Sarah's world. The love she had built, the life she had shared, all of it was a lie. Yet, even in the face of such betrayal, her heart ached for the real Ethan, the boy who had touched her life so deeply. As she grappled with this shocking truth, Sarah made a decision. She would find the real Ethan, no matter the cost. She would confront the imposter and expose the truth. And she would offer the real Ethan a chance at the life he deserved. The journey that lay ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. But Sarah was determined. She was armed with the truth, the love of her family, and the unwavering belief that justice would prevail. Sarah's quest to uncover the truth led her on a perilous journey. She delved into the past, piecing together the fragments of Ethan's life. She traveled to the city where the imposter had once lived, seeking clues and interviewing people who might have known him. With each step, the mystery deepened. She encountered shadowy figures, received cryptic messages, and faced threats to her own life. But Sarah was undeterred. Her love for the real Ethan fueled her determination. Finally, after months of relentless pursuit, she found him. The real Ethan was living a solitary life, haunted by the past. He was shocked to learn of his stolen identity and the life he could have had. As Sarah and the real Ethan reconnected, a bittersweet bond formed. They shared stories, laughter, and tears. They mourned the lost years, the life that could have been. Yet, they also found hope in the future. With the help of the authorities, Sarah exposed the imposter. The man was brought to justice, paying the price for his deception. In the aftermath, Sarah and the real Ethan found solace in each other's company. They built a new life together, a life based on honesty, trust, and unwavering love. Their story became a testament to the enduring power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the triumph of truth. The news of Sarah's discovery sent shockwaves through the community. People were both horrified and inspired by her courage and resilience. Her story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of love and truth. As Sarah and the real Ethan settled into their new life, they faced challenges. The past had left its scars, and they had to learn to trust again. But with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. They found joy in the simple things, cherishing every moment together. Years later, Sarah and Ethan were celebrated as a symbol of love and perseverance. Their story was told and retold, inspiring generations to come. Their love story, a tale of loss, deception, and ultimate redemption, became a timeless reminder that love conquers all. The night after Ryan's death felt like an eternity. Madison stayed at the cabin, her trembling hands clutching the blood-stained shirt he'd worn. Every corner of the room carried his memory. The way he'd smiled at her over coffee that morning, the sound of his laugh when she teased him about the creaking floorboards. Now, silence filled the space, broken only by the occasional crackle of the dying fire. She refused to sleep, terrified she'd wake up and forget the way his voice sounded when he told her he loved her. The next morning, Madison dragged herself to the edge of the woods where Ryan was buried under the soft earth, marked by a hastily carved wooden cross. Her fingers traced the inscription she'd managed to etch, Ryan Hart, forever my protector. She knelt, pressing her forehead to the cross, her tears soaking into the dirt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I should have listened to you. I should have run. You'd still be alive if I—" Her words dissolved into sobs, her body trembling. But beneath the grief, something else began to stir. A fire, a rage she couldn't contain. "They took you from me," she said through gritted teeth. "They think they've won, but I'll show them." Madison spent the next week transforming herself. The woman who had once worked a quiet job as a librarian, who'd laughed with Ryan over shared plates of pancakes, no longer existed. In her place was someone forged by loss, sharpened by vengeance. Elliot found her days later, holed up in a dingy motel, poring over blueprints and notes scattered across the bed. "Madison," he began cautiously, "what are you doing?" She didn't look up. "I'm ending this." He frowned, stepping closer. "You already did. Rains is in prison. The organization is falling apart. What more can you?" "They're still out there," she snapped, cutting him off. "Rains's son, his men. They killed Ryan, and they'll keep coming for me. For you." Her voice cracked, but she held firm. "I won't stop until they're gone." Elliot hesitated, the weight of his own grief evident in his eyes. You think Ryan would want this? For you to throw your life away? Madison's hands clenched into fists. Ryan isn't here to want anything. They took that from him. From me. Her words silenced him, and for a moment, they just stared at each other, both broken in their own ways. I'm in, Elliot finally said, his voice low. Madison looked at him, surprised. If you're going after them, he continued, you're not doing it alone. They started small, tracking down low-level associates who had gone underground after Rains' arrest. Madison was relentless, her methods sharp and unyielding. One night, after an informant gave them a lead on Rains' son, Madison returned to the motel exhausted but alive. Elliot sat at the table, nursing a beer. You're going to burn out, he said, watching her carefully. She sank onto the bed, her body aching. I can't stop. You need to, or you'll end up just like Ryan, Elliot said. The words harsh but true. Madison froze, her chest tightening. Maybe I don't care, she whispered. Elliot's eyes softened. I know you think this will make the pain go away, but it won't bring him back, Maddie. She looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. Then what will? Tell me, Elliot, what will make this stop hurting? One night, as Madison prepared for their next move, she found herself back at the cabin. She hadn't been there since she buried Ryan, and the sight of it nearly broke her. She sat by his grave, the stars glittering above her. I miss you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know how to keep going without you. Every day feels like a battle I can't win. The wind rustled the trees, and for a brief moment, she thought she heard his voice. You're stronger than you think, Maddie. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I'm so scared, Ryan. But as the wind carried the leaves around her, she felt a strange sense of peace. She could almost hear his laughter, his promise that he'd always protect her. Madison and Elliot finally tracked Rains' son to a remote estate outside the city. It was heavily guarded, the kind of place no one entered without an army. This is it, Madison said, her voice steady. Elliot glanced at her. You sure about this? She nodded, her resolve unshaken. He doesn't get to walk away after everything he's done. Not after Ryan. As they moved closer, Madison's heart pounded. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the chance to end it all. But with every step, doubt crept in. Would this bring her peace, or would it leave her even emptier than before? The confrontation was brutal. Gunfire echoed through the estate as Madison and Elliot fought their way inside. By the time they reached Rains' son, they were both battered and bruised, but alive. Madison held the gun steady, aiming it at the man who had taken everything from her. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice shaking. You've already won. Her hands trembled, tears streaming down her face. Madison, Elliot said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. It's over. Don't let him take any more from you. She stared at the man before her, the weight of her grief and anger pressing down on her. But as she looked into his terrified eyes, she realized something. Killing him wouldn't bring Ryan back. It wouldn't heal the hole in her heart. She lowered the gun, her voice breaking. You don't deserve my forgiveness, but I won't let you destroy what's left of me. The police arrived moments later, taking Rains' son into custody. Madison and Elliot stood outside, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. It's over, Elliot said, his voice filled with relief. Madison nodded, but her heart still ached. She looked up at the sky, the soft hues of pink and gold reminding her of Ryan's favorite mornings. I hope you're proud of me, she whispered, and for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of peace. But grief is never simple, and love leaves scars that time cannot heal. Madison's journey wasn't over, and the world she faced was still filled with shadows. But she carried Ryan with her, his memory a light that guided her through the darkness. The days after Rains' son was taken into custody passed in a blur. Madison returned to her apartment, a hollow shell of the woman she once was. Detroit was quieter now. The streets were no longer haunted by the crime syndicate that had claimed so many lives, including Ryan's. Yet, for her, The silence was unbearable. Her heart felt like it had been ripped open, the jagged edges exposed to every passing moment. The world kept spinning, but Madison felt stuck, drowning in the memories of the life she'd lost. One evening, she found herself at Ryan's grave again. She had brought a single white lily, its delicate petals trembling in the cold November wind. She knelt by the cross, her fingers tracing his name as tears streamed down her face. "I did it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I took them down, but it doesn't feel like a victory. It just feels empty." The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, she swore she felt his presence, like he was sitting beside her. "I don't know how to do this without you," she sobbed. "I thought revenge would make it easier, but it didn't. It just reminded me of how much I need you." That night, Madison returned home to find a small, battered envelope waiting for her on the kitchen counter. She froze, her breath catching as she saw her name written in Ryan's familiar handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter, written in ink that had smudged slightly, as though he'd been in a hurry when he wrote it. "Maddie, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise to stay by your side. I'm sorry. More than anything, I wanted to give you the life you deserve, the life we dreamed about when everything was over. But I know you. I know your heart, your strength, your fire. You'll survive this, even if it feels impossible right now. And one day, you'll smile again. You'll love again. And I'll be watching, so proud of you. Don't let the darkness take you. Live for both of us, Maddie. That's all I ever wanted. Yours always, Ryan." Madison clutched the letter to her chest, her sobs echoing through the empty apartment. His words were a lifeline, a reminder that even in death, his love for her was unshakable. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, Madison began to rebuild. She took a job at a local community center, helping underprivileged kids find a safe space away from the streets. She poured her heart into the work, finding solace in the laughter of children and the small victories they celebrated together. But the pain never fully went away. Every now and then, she would catch a glimpse of a man with Ryan's build or hear someone laugh the way he used to, and her heart would ache all over again. One evening, as she walked home from the center, she passed the diner where she and Ryan had shared so many quiet moments. Unable to resist, she stepped inside. The place hadn't changed. The same vinyl booths, the same smell of coffee and grease. She slid into their old booth, running her fingers over the cracked tabletop. "Coffee?" the waitress asked, her smile kind but tired. Madison nodded. "Yeah, black, please." As she sat there, memories flooded her mind. Ryan's teasing grin, the way he'd steal her fries when he thought she wasn't looking. She smiled through her tears, her heart heavy but full. The waitress returned with her coffee, setting it down gently. "You okay, hon?" she asked, her tone gentle. Madison hesitated before nodding. "I will be," she said quietly. As she sipped her coffee, she noticed a man sitting a few booths away, scribbling in a notebook. He was older, his salt and pepper hair disheveled, but there was a warmth in his eyes when he glanced up and caught her staring. "Sorry," she mumbled, embarrassed. He smiled. "No need to apologize. You looked like you were lost in thought." Madison nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I'm Peter," he said, extending a hand. She hesitated before shaking it. "Madison." "Nice to meet you, Madison," he said, his smile kind. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel since losing Ryan: curiosity. That night, Madison returned home and pulled out Ryan's letter. She read it again, her heart aching but steady. "I'll try," she whispered. "I'll try to live for both of us." The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both pain and possibility. But Madison knew one thing for sure. Ryan's love had given her the strength to face whatever came next, and she would carry him with her, always. The days turned colder, and with each passing sunset, Madison felt both stronger and more fragile. The presence of Peter, the man from the diner, began to grow in her life. At first, It was just polite nods and occasional conversations whenever their paths crossed. Then, one night, as she sat alone in their booth with her usual black coffee, he slid into the seat across from her. "Mind if I join?" he asked, his tone gentle, careful not to intrude. She hesitated, but then nodded. "Sure." They talked about everything and nothing. How Detroit felt both too big and too small. How the winter chill seemed harsher this year. Peter told her he was a writer, one struggling to finish a novel he'd been working on for years. "And you?" he asked. "What keeps you busy?" Madison hesitated, the weight of her past tugging at her. "I help out at a community center," she said, her voice quiet. Peter smiled. "That sounds meaningful." "It is," she said, surprising herself. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of warmth that wasn't tied to grief. But grief is a stubborn thing. It doesn't let go easily. One evening, Madison returned home from work and found herself unpacking an old box she hadn't touched since Ryan's death. Inside were photographs of their time together. Silly selfies, snapshots from road trips, and a Polaroid of the two of them at the cabin. His arms were around her, his face pressed to her cheek as they laughed at something she couldn't remember. The ache hit her all at once, like a tidal wave crashing against her chest. She sank to the floor, clutching the photograph. "I miss you," she whispered into the silence. "I don't know how to do this without you." The room felt emptier than ever, the shadows stretching long into the night. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope slipped under her door. She frowned, picking it up. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. Inside was a single piece of paper, its edges worn. "You're closer to the truth than you think. Don't stop searching." Her heart pounded as she read and reread the cryptic message. Who had sent it? And what truth were they talking about? Madison's mind immediately went to Ryan. Had he left something behind? A clue? A secret she hadn't uncovered? Determined to find answers, she reached out to Elliot. He was hesitant at first. "Madison, you've been through enough. Maybe it's time to let it go," he said, his voice cautious. "I can't," she insisted. "There's something I'm missing, Elliot. Something Ryan wanted me to know." Elliot sighed. "Okay, where do we start?" They began retracing Ryan's steps, going through old notes and files he'd hidden in safe houses. Madison's heart raced as they uncovered fragments of information. Names, dates, locations, all pointing to something bigger than Rains and his son. Late one night, as Madison sat surrounded by papers, her phone buzzed. It was Peter. "Hey," he said when she answered. "I know it's late, but I was wondering if you'd like some company." She hesitated, torn between her growing feelings for him and the lingering guilt that clung to her like a shadow. "Sure," she said finally. When Peter arrived, he brought a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. They sat on her couch, the city lights casting a soft glow through the window. "What's all this?" he asked, gesturing to the papers. "Just trying to make sense of some things," she said vaguely. Peter studied her for a moment. "You carry a lot, don't you?" His words caught her off guard, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. "I don't know how to let it go," she admitted finally. Peter reached over, his hand brushing hers. "Maybe you don't have to. Maybe you just learn to carry it differently." Their connection deepened after that night, but Madison couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The message, the files, the lingering questions about Ryan's death, they haunted her. One evening, as she and Peter walked through a snowy park, she decided to confide in him. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her breath visible in the cold air. Peter nodded, his expression encouraging. She told him everything about Ryan, the syndicate, the revenge, and the mysterious letter. When she finished, Peter was quiet for a long time. "You think someone's still out there?" he asked finally. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I can't ignore this." Peter reached for her hand. "Whatever it is, you don't have to face it alone." But that night, as Madison sifted through more files, something clicked. A name she'd overlooked before. A man who had worked closely with Rains but had vanished before the arrests. She stared at the name, her blood running cold. Peter Warren. Her hands trembled as she pieced it together. The way Peter had appeared so suddenly, his interest in her life, his careful questions about Ryan. Madison? His voice startled her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said softly, stepping closer. Her heart pounded as she backed away. "Who are you?" Peter sighed. His eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. "I didn't want it to be like this." And then the room went dark. As Anya's book gained popularity, it sparked a global movement of love and kindness. People were inspired to reconnect with loved ones, to forgive, and to embrace the beauty of human connection. Sarah and Ethan's legacy, once confined to the pages of a book, had spread far and wide, touching lives and inspiring hearts. One day, a young couple, deeply in love, read Anya's book. Inspired by Sarah and Ethan's unwavering devotion, they decided to follow in their footsteps. They faced their own trials and tribulations, but their love, nurtured by the spirit of Sarah and Ethan, remained steadfast. As generations passed, the legend of Sarah and Ethan continued to inspire. Their love story became a timeless tale, a beacon of hope in a world often filled with darkness. It was a love story that transcended time, a love story that would forever be remembered. And so, the story of Sarah and Ethan continued to live on, a timeless tale of love, loss, and redemption. It was a story that would be told for generations to come, a love story that would echo through eternity. In the quiet moments of their twilight years, Sarah and Ethan often reflected on their extraordinary journey. They would sit on their porch, hand in hand, watching the sunset, their hearts filled with gratitude. They had experienced love in its purest form, a love that had transcended time, distance, and deception. Their story was a testament to the enduring power of human connection, a beacon of hope for those who dared to dream. As they grew older, their love story became a legend, whispered in hushed tones and celebrated in heartfelt poems. It was a tale of resilience, forgiveness, and the unwavering power of love. One day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Ethan peacefully passed away, their spirits soaring to the heavens. Their love story, etched in the annals of time, would forever inspire generations to come. It was a love story for the ages, a love story that would never fade.